Have you ever stopped to think, really think, about what fundamental piece of the health puzzle might be missing? Something maybe right in front of us, but largely overlooked in our busy modern lives. Well, today we're doing one of our deep dives. We're going into some fascinating source material that honestly promises some surprising insights about health, and from some pretty unexpected places.
Yeah.
We're focusing on vitamin D, yes, but also the really profound impact of sunlight and even specific kinds of light, like infrared, on our overall well-being. We've got this stack of articles, research, some really compelling stories too that, well, they challenge some common beliefs and throw up some genuinely eye-opening statistics.
It's really fascinating, actually, how these different sources connect things that seem separate, you know? You've got geographical data, then you've got cellular biology,
Yeah.
and they all come together to paint this much richer, more complex picture of how light and the specific vitamin interact with our bodies. So our plan today is to sort of distill these key findings, maybe challenge an assumption or two along the way.
It's exactly. Our mission here is to give you a shortcut, basically. A way to get well-informed on this topic quickly, with facts that might surprise you and takeaways you can actually think about using.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Okay, vitamin D. Most of us know it's crucial for strong bones, right? That's usually what you hear about first. But the sources we looked at, they show it plays a much, much broader role in the body.
That's absolutely right. Take, for example, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. He founded the Moss Report. He actually discovered his own vitamin D levels were insufficient. His score was 27, and, under 20 is generally considered a deficiency, so not severely deficient, but definitely insufficient.
Okay.
And this led him to start supplementing and also consciously get more sun exposure. Anecdotally, he reported this really significant boost in energy and vitality. He highlighted that as a potential benefit that goes way beyond just bone health. And he mentioned, his doctor was fine with him taking 5,000 IUs a day initially, though he later settled on 2,000 IU. It's easy. It's low cost.
Right. And that's one person's experience. But then the science starts to widen out, doesn't it? Our sources point us towards Dr. William B. Grant. He's considered a world expert on sunlight and vitamin D. He directs UNARC, the Sunlight Nutrition and Health Research Center. The guy's published just an incredible number of papers, sometimes alongside really big names like Bruce Ames and Walter Willett.
Exactly. Dr. Grant's early work is fascinating. It built on research by Cedric and Frank Garland brothers, actually. He used these large-scale geographical ecological studies, and what she found were these inverse correlations between how much solar UVB radiation an area got and the mortality rates for at least 13 different types of cancer.
Wow, 13 times.
Yes, things like breast, colon, ovarian cancer. It strongly suggested a protective effect, likely mediated by vitamin D production from that UVB exposure. His 2002 paper, the title is something like An Estimate of Premature Cancer Mortality in the U.S. Due to Inadequate Doses of Solar Ultraviolet B Radiation. It's one of his most cited works. And it really links this idea that getting enough vitamin D, maybe along with calcium, could potentially reduce cancer risk.
Okay, so if the research is pointing this way, suggesting these broader benefits, why isn't this like front page news?
Yeah.
Why aren't we hearing more about vitamin D beyond just bones?
Well, that's a really good question. And a lot of the, let's say, confusion or debate seems to stem from one particular very large study. It's called the VITAL study. It was a big randomized controlled trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 2019. And yes, people like Ed Giovannucci and Walter Willett were authors on it.
All right, I remember hearing about VITAL. It involved, what, over 25,000 people? Men over 50, women over 55, including African Americans, which is important for diversity in these studies. But the initial takeaway seemed, well, disappointing, didn't it?
It did. The primary conclusion, the one that got picked up by places like the New York Times, was basically that vitamin D supplementation, they used 2,000 IU a day. It didn't reduce the incidence of invasive cancer or cardiovascular events overall.
So just flat out no effect.
That was the headline, essentially. But it raises that important question, was the conclusion really quite that simple? Because a subsequent analysis, a different paper published in the European Review for Medical and Pharmacological Sciences by Barry Sears and some colleagues, they went back and re-examined the VITAL data, and they found something really crucial. The original study hadn't reported looking at the data stratified by body mass index, by BMI.
Okay, stratified by PMI. So separating people based on their weight category. Let's unpack that. What happened when they did look at it that way?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. When Sears and his group broke out the data by BMI, they found, a remarkable observation. Normal weight individuals, So people with a BMI in the normal range who were in the vitamin D group showed a 24% lower incidence of cancer compared to the placebo group.
24% lower. That sounds significant.
It's highly significant, yeah. And the proposed reason why the overweight and obese participants didn't show the same benefit, it likely comes down to how vitamin D works. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. So in people with more body fat, the theory is that the vitamin D gets sequestered, kind of soaked up by the fat tissue.
Ah, I see. So it doesn't circulate as effectively in their bloodstream to do its job.
Precisely. The Sears paper actually suggested that obese adults might need quite a bit more, maybe 2 to 3 times higher doses. They threw out numbers like 6,000 to 10,000 IUs a day for a loading period, then maybe 3,000 to 6,000 for maintenance.
Wow, that's a lot higher than the 2,000 IU used in Vital.
It is, and of course, it's absolutely crucial to emphasize anyone considering supplementation, especially at higher doses, really needs to talk to their doctor and get their levels tested. This isn't medical advice, just reporting on the research.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Okay, but here's the kicker, right? This wasn't just an outside group critiquing the study. What did the original Vital authors do?
This is the really fascinating part. The original Vital study authors, including Giovannucci and Willett, they published their own secondary analysis. This was in JAMA Network Open in 2020. And in this paper, they specifically looked at the effect of vitamin D supplements on advanced cancer, so metastatic or fatal cancers, the really dangerous ones. And they explicitly examined how BMI might modify the effect.
And what did they find in their own follow-up?
Their own findings basically aligned with the critique from Sears. Overall, looking at everyone, they found a significant 17% reduction in advanced cancers in the vitamin D group.
17% reduction in advanced cancers. That's already different from no effect.
Definitely. But then, when they stratified by BMI, just like Sears suggested, among those with a normal BMI, there was a 38% reduction in advanced cancers. 38%.
38% lower risk of metastatic or fatal cancer for normal weight people taking vitamin D.
That's what their own secondary analysis showed, yes. For the overweight or obese groups, the reduction was much smaller, only about 11%, which fits the fat solubility idea.
So let's just pause on that. The same researchers who initially published results widely interpreted as vitamin D has no effect on cancer later published their own analysis showing a nearly 40% reduction in the most feared kinds of cancer for a large segment of the participants. And yet, did that finding get the same level of media attention as the first one?
Not nearly to the same extent, no. And it really highlights something important about nutritional science and how it's communicated. The initial framing, the study design choices, like maybe not planning for BMI stratification up front, can really shape the public message, sometimes obscuring these really crucial nuances and potentially life-saving insights.
Okay, so that's a powerful case for vitamin D, especially when we look closer at the data. But what about the source of vitamin D for most of human history, the sun itself? You mentioned Dr. Seholt earlier. Is there more to sunlight than just making D?
Absolutely. Dr. Roger Seholt, he's a board-certified critical care physician. He makes this point really strongly. He says, and I'm quoting loosely here, sunlight has far more benefits than just vitamin D. He acknowledges, yes, supplementing with D is beneficial, particularly if you're deficient. But he argues that this simplistic equation, sunlight equals vitamin D, so if I pop a pill, I don't need the sun, that idea is, it's being debunked.
Okay, so if it's not just vitamin D, what else is the sun doing for us? Let's unpack that.
Dr. Seholt brings up the concept of infrared light, or IR light, from the sun. This is a part of the light spectrum we can't see, but we feel it as heat. And he explains that this infrared light can actually penetrate quite deeply into our body tissues, maybe up to 8 centimeters, which is over 3 inches.
Wow, that deep.
Yeah. And he points to a really interesting 2019 paper by Russell Ryder, who's the executive editor of the journal Melatonin Research, and a light engineer named Scott Zimmerman. Their paper proposes that this deep penetrating infrared light fundamentally interacts with and actually stimulates the mitochondria within our cells.
Mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, right, where energy is made.
Yeah, exactly. And this is crucial because mitochondrial dysfunction, when they aren't working properly, is increasingly linked to a whole host of chronic diseases. Things like dementia, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even kidney disease.
Okay, so IR light stimulates mitochondria. How?
Yes.
That's the mechanism they propose.
Dr. Seholt suggests based on Reiter and Zimmerman's work and others, that IR light upregulates the production of melatonin within the mitochondria. Now, we usually think of melatonin for sleep, produced by the pineal gland, but it seems mitochondria make their own melatonin when stimulated by IR light, and this mitochondrial melatonin acts as a potent, localized antioxidant. It essentially helps keep the mitochondria cool, protecting them from damage caused by energy production, and improves their efficiency, their energy output.
Interesting. So IR light boosts mitochondrial function via melatonin. And Dr. Seeholt even suggested vitamin D levels might sometimes be just a marker.
Yeah, he posited that, particularly in the context of some discussions around COVID-19 outcomes. Perhaps low vitamin D wasn't always the direct cause of poorer outcomes, but rather a marker indicating that those individuals weren't getting enough sunlight exposure overall, including that beneficial infrared light component. It's a provocative idea.
It really is. It shifts the focus from just the vitamin to the light source itself. But, it sounds complex. What kind of real-world evidence actually supports this idea that infrared light or just sunlight exposure beyond D has a direct impact?
Well, there are some incredibly compelling stories and data points. Consider this one. It's quite recent. From June 2024. A 15-year-old boy diagnosed with blood cancer. He'd had chemotherapy, which, as it does, suppressed his immune system severely. And he developed this horrific flesh-eating fungal infection in his lung. He became critically ill. Doctors literally thought he had maybe 2 days left to live.
Oh, my goodness.
His dying wish, remarkably, was just to go outside.
So what happened?
Get this. His medical team actually honored that wish. They moved his entire hospital bed outdoors.
Wow.
After just 2 days of being outside, and apparently he was also consistently using a specific light therapy device called a Firefly, which emits certain wavelengths. But after just 2 days outside, the infection in his remaining lung tissue was, astoundingly, 60 to 70% gone.
60 to 70% gone in 2 days.
Yeah. 5 days later, he was discharged from the hospital, completely off oxygen. Now, obviously, this is an anecdote, just one case study, but it's incredibly profound, isn't it? A powerful suggestion of light's potential role in recovery, even in extreme situations.
That's genuinely astonishing. Okay, anecdotes are powerful, but what about broader data?
It does seem to align with other observations. Dr. Seholt mentioned studies showing that hospital patients whose beds are simply closer to a window tend to get discharged faster. Simple proximity to natural light seems to matter.
Sure.
And then there's a really significant study he highlighted from Brazil involving COVID-19 patients. Researchers designed a special jacket fitted with LED bulbs emitting near-infrared radiation, specifically at 940 nanometers. Patients wore this jacket for just 15 minutes, once a day, for 7 days. The results. The group wearing the IR jacket had an average hospital stay of 8 days.
Okay, and the control group?
The control group, who didn't wear the jacket, had an average stay of 12 days.
12 days versus 8 days. That's a 4-day reduction in hospital stay.
Exactly, a 4-day difference. Think about the implications not just for the patient's experience, but for healthcare costs, hospital capacity. It's potentially huge.
That really is huge. Are there larger population-level studies looking at sunlight?
Yes, geographical studies also back this up. There was research from the University of Edinburgh looking at areas across the UK, the northern part of the US, and Italy. They found that regions with more sunlight consistently had lower COVID-19 mortality rates. And crucially, they tried to account for vitamin D levels, finding that the sunlight effect seemed to be independent of vitamin D.
Independent of vitamin D. So again, suggesting a direct benefit from the sunlight itself, beyond just making the vitamin.
Precisely. And perhaps the most striking evidence comes from long-term observational studies. There's a famous Swedish study that followed somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 women for 20 years. What they found was that the women who reported the most sun exposure had the lowest overall mortality, lower death rates from cancer, from cardiovascular disease, and from other non-cancer, non-cardiovascular causes.
Lowest overall mortality with the most sun. Okay, that makes sense, but how big was the effect?
This is the truly astonishing part. The magnitude of the effect was so large that women in Sweden who spent the most time outside and were smokers.
Smokers, okay.
They had the same overall mortality rate as women who did not spend much time outside but were non-smokers.
Wait, let me process that. Sun exposure essentially counteracted the mortality risk of smoking in that group.
That's what the data showed. It's a mind-bending finding, suggesting the health benefits of sun exposure are incredibly potent.
Has anyone else found something similar?
Yes. Dr. Richard Weller, he's a dermatologist over in the UK, replicated this kind of finding using the huge UK biobank dataset. We're talking 300,000 to 400,000 people. He found, maybe counterintuitively for a dermatologist, no statistically significant increase in melanoma incidence with more sun exposure in that cohort, but he did find a significant reduction in death from non-skin cancers and cardiovascular disease.
No increased melanoma risk, but lower risk of dying from other major diseases.
Correct. It led him to publish a pretty provocative op-ed piece titled "Sunlight, Time for a Rethink."
It certainly sounds like it. The implication seems to be that maybe just 15 minutes of sun exposure a day could, like you said, flip a switch, improve mitochondrial function, and impact a whole range of health outcomes.
That's the emerging picture, yeah. So how do we potentially harness these benefits? It seems to be about optimizing our overall light environment, aiming for, bright days and dark nights, respecting our natural circadian rhythms. Morning and evening sunlight are interesting because they have proportionally more infrared and red light and less of the potentially damaging ultraviolet light. So gentler exposure, but still beneficial IR.
Even on cloudy days, does that still count?
Apparently, yes. Even on an overcast day, being outside provides significantly more infrared light than staying indoors under typical artificial lighting.
Which brings us to indoor lighting. You touched on this. How's that fit in?
Well, it's a really important consideration, especially when you think about how much time we spend indoors. I think the stats are something like 92% or 93% of our time is spent indoors in places like the UK and US.
93%. Wow.
And, old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, the ones we phased out for energy efficiency, they actually produced a pretty broad spectrum of light, including red and infrared.
Right, they got hot. That was the infrared.
Exactly. But many modern energy-efficient LEDs, they tend to emit a very narrow spectrum, often heavily weighted towards blue light, which is great for alertness during the day, maybe, but potentially disruptive, especially at night, and lacking that beneficial red and infrared component.
And windows, do they let the good stuff in?
Not entirely. Standard window glass blocks most of the UVB needed for vitamin D synthesis, and it also blocks a significant portion of the near-infrared wavelengths that seem to be particularly beneficial for mitochondria.
So being indoors, even near a window, isn't the same as being outside.
It seems not. And interestingly, nature itself seems to enhance the outdoor benefit. Trees, grass, green spaces, they are actually highly reflective of infrared light.
Green spaces reflect infrared.
Yeah. There was this fascinating study called the Green Heart Study down in South Louisville, Kentucky. They planted around 8,000 trees in a specific area, and they tracked the health of the residents. What they found was a 13 to 20% reduction in markers of inflammation, specifically HSCRP, which is linked to stroke and heart attack risk.
13 to 20% reduction in inflammation.
And about a 10 to 15% reduction in actual strokes among the residents without any other major lifestyle interventions being pushed.
Just from planting trees in the neighborhood.
Just from greening the environment. The researchers believe it's likely a combination of factors, maybe the reflected infrared light playing a role, but also compounds called phytoncides released by trees, which have been shown to boost human immune function. It points to this direct health benefit from just being in greener environments.
This whole deep dive has been incredibly illuminating, pun intended, I guess. It really shows how interconnected our health is with these really fundamental elements. Vitamin D, yes, but also just natural light in its broader spectrum. From digging into the nuances of big studies like VITAL to understanding this emerging science around infrared light and mitochondria, it's clear there's way more going on with these simple factors than we often realize.
Absolutely. And if you try to connect all these dots, look at the bigger picture. I mean, applying something like Hill's criteria for causality, which is a framework scientists use to judge if a correlation likely means causation, the evidence strongly supports the hypothesis that vitamin D plays a role in cancer prevention. And then this emerging science on infrared light and mitochondrial function, it just opens up these really exciting new avenues for understanding health, maybe even preventing or treating chronic diseases at a very fundamental cellular level.
So wrapping this up, what's the ultimate takeaway for you listening right now? What does this all mean?
Well, I think it raises a really important, maybe provocative question. Could the key to tackling some of our biggest, most pressing modern health challenges, chronic diseases, maybe even immune function, could it be, in part, as simple and accessible as consciously getting outside for, say, 15 minutes a day? Or at least being much more mindful about our indoor light environment, making sure it supports our natural biology rather than disrupting it? It's definitely something worth mulling over, maybe exploring for yourself.
It really is. And as always, we encourage you, Talk to your own healthcare provider about this. Discuss vitamin D testing, appropriate supplementation if needed, and developing smart, safe sunlight habits that work for you. The journey to being well-informed, to taking control of your health, often starts with just one step. Or maybe, in this case, stepping into a little more light.